Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is What a Scream, where usually I pick out a subject and my special guest and I pick two films that encompass that subject. But this episode is a very special one. And I have decided to take on two guests to talk about my favourite horror film of all time, The Exorcist. Because I felt like it couldn't just be done in like half an episode, so it needs a whole episode. So my guests for this very special episode is Kyasia Fields, who I've had on before. We were talking about werewolves, and also Paul Walshe, who I also previously had on talking about Christianity versus paganism. So before we dive into The Exorcist, I'll get you to introduce yourselves. So Kyasia, if you'd like to go first.
Awesome. Hi, my name is Kyasia. You can just call me Kai if you want. I live in Texas. I am the host of Monstrosity's Voice, Horrors and Church Conversation. I'm so sorry. My cat is scratching at me. Monstrosity's Voice podcast. I'm a cat mom. And I also am the founder of KaiFX Horror Group, which is just a multimedia platform that supports inclusion in the horror genre, also while highlighting Black and Brown BIPOC horror content creators. I'm also a special effects makeup artist, and I do a whole bunch of other things under this umbrella of horror. So, yeah.
And Paul?
Hello, everyone. My name is Paul, and I am a director. I direct plays and movies and short movies and things like that. I'm also an actor, and I'm also a burlesque performer as well, and do lots of different things like stage management and all these cool things, and get to meet really cool people. And I absolutely love horror. I saw my first horror movie when I was 4, and I've been obsessed ever since.
Yes, Paul has a wonderful drag act called The Baroness, who is my favourite. You're my favourite.
Yeah, thanks. I know you're not meant to say that, but you know.
So, Kyasia, if you're ever over in Ireland, you have to come to one of our shows.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. Although, after a year and a half of lockdown, I'm not sure if my frocks fit anymore. I'm going to have a look.
I think we all have that problem.
Yeah. It might be a very active summer trying to get the figure back, you know.
Yeah. Or you know what? That's what sewing machines are for. We can always alter. So as I said, the theme for this week is The Exorcist. So before we get on to dissecting, I'm going to ask, when was the first time you saw The Exorcist, and do you like it? Are you a fan of The Exorcist, Kai?
The show. I absolutely love The Exorcist. I don't know if I said it in the last episode when we were talking about werewolves, but I love 70s horror. Mm-hmm. Hold on. There we go. I love 70s horror. More so because it's a lot of like critical standing that you can see. For example, like post-Vietnam, like anger, you can see a lot of that in 70s horror. But specifically with The Exorcist, I'm only 26 years old and I'm very, very young. So when I was younger and I was a kid, I was petrified. I grew up really, really, really Christian. So I wouldn't necessarily say that I saw things similar to The Exorcist growing up in the church, but I kind of did. Mm-hmm. So seeing that in real life, and then seeing hearing, because I didn't see it as a kid, hearing about The Exorcist and hearing about Linda Blair or Reagan, I was petrified. The makeup, I'm a makeup artist. I'm just like, the makeup is so scary. It wasn't until I was in college that I, actually watched it, and I was like, this is great. It's a great film. Outside of it being like blatantly petrifying, it's a great movie. And the makeup is amazing. And I'm like, it took me this long to watch it, and now I'm obsessed.
Yeah. So you're a bit of a late bloomer compared to, yeah.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah. A lot of people see... sorry, go on.
Oh, no. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, a lot of people see, like, when they're quite young and they're, like, traumatized for life. And that's their, most traumatic horror experience is The Exorcist at, like, 5.
I understood like the pop culture references, of course. I knew what it was about, but I'd never seen it. So when I actually sat down and watched it, and I'm kind of glad I waited because I was able to truly, truly understand and the importance of it as just a film, outside of the horrors of it. And it was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool.
And what about yourself, Paul?
I actually don't know the exact age. It was whenever it was re-released on video.
Okay.
That's all I know. It was sometime in the mid-90s, and it was banned in Ireland. It was banned in Ireland and the UK, and had never been released in Ireland. Hadn't got the cinemas here at all. And I just remember my uncles and cousins and stuff, because they had all been working in England in the 70s, and they'd come home and they'd talk about this movie, right? And this Exorcist, and how bad it was, and how they ran out of the cinema. And then when I started collecting the horror magazines in the early 90s, when I was 12, let's say, there was like I was saying, the pictures of the makeup, like Reagan would be there in her makeup, and you'd see that, or you'd see a picture of Pazuzu, or you'd see something. And then eventually I got to see this video, and I was really, which we all know I'm the opposite now, but at the time I was very religious. I was actually on the edge of training to be a priest, believe it or not. And I sat in my mother's house, which backs on to the church graveyard, and watched The Exorcist on my own in the middle of the night, and it absolutely scared the pants off me. And I didn't know why, but I've looked into it since, and why it did, because it's actually the first hour that really scares me. Before there's makeup, there's just a feeling in it, and no other film has ever made me feel like that. None. Even the other ones I love, The Shining, which I love, etc. Because I'm a big fan of the 70s stuff too, in case you didn't know, the British and the American stuff. But oh my God, there's something about The Exorcist just absolutely made me twirl. Like, when did you see it first?
I saw it when I was about 15, 16, and as you said, it'd been banned in Ireland. I wasn't allowed to watch it because my parents thought it was too scary for me. Yeah. And then I went over to a boyfriend's house, and we were watching scary movies, and he was like, "Have you ever seen The Exorcist?" And I was like, "No." And he put it on, and the bits where like the masturbation with the cross and that,
yes,
I just burst out laughing from, like, not even because I found it funny, but because it was so shocking.
Yeah.
I burst out laughing, and I just remember my boyfriend at the time turned around to me and was like, "You have no soul. What is wrong with you?" And I was just like, I'm sorry. But like you said, it has that atmosphere that absolute terrified me even before everything kicks off. And it stayed with me long after the credits had rolled. And I remember that night I was asleep, and I got woken up by two foxes that were mating. Foxes scream when they mate, and oh my God, I jumped out of my skin.
Yeah.
Absolute jumped out of my skin. And that's probably why it's my favourite film ever.
It has that power though. I was going out with a girl called Michelle, and her, big time. Not obviously my wife Amory, the girl I went out with before her was called Michelle, and her mum heard I'd watched The Exorcist, and she freaked out. Like, full on thought that I had done damage to my soul. But that's the power the movie has,
So let's go on to talking about the actual film. So it follows Reagan McNeil, who is a 12-year-old. She's kind of on the cusp of being a teenager, and she becomes possessed. And anyone who doesn't know, The Exorcist, and doesn't know what the theme is, it's kind of like, where have you been? I think everyone, even if you haven't seen the film, you know what it's about. So I don't really want to dwell too much on saying, what the film is about and the storyline. We've obviously got like the two priests, Karis and Merrin, and then they are brought in to try and exorcise the demons from Reagan after science has failed her and her mother. So my first question, what do you think is the main theme in The Exorcist, Kai?
I think it's duality between like our reliance on science and then our reliance on spirit or religion. You can kind of see that duality with, I'm going to call him Damie because I just love Damie.
Why you do this to me, Damie?
Very traditional. Like, hey, it's only, there was this one scene where he was talking about like, hey, like these are the multiple like personalities or like whatever that she had manifested. And Mary's like, no, it's just one. Like, she's possessed, dude, And Damie, of course, with his academic background, is like, well, the mixture of his academic background and his actual, him being a priest, it's like, yeah, it's a little bit more than that. So it's also, and then you can see that tug with him as well. Like, he lost his faith at one point, or it seemed like it. So it's just like duality. Like, Do we rely solely on one thing?
Mm-hmm.
There needs to be balance.
Yeah. And what about you, Paul? What do you think?
Yeah, I think I put her the nail on it there for me. It's kind of duality, but it, it's kind of like, oh, I can't even find the word for it. It's like a battle of doctrines, like science versus religion is one, and then you have, like, as well as that, you have old religion versus new religion as well, and it's like Kai was saying there about Demi, that Demi is a psychiatrist and a priest, and then Murren, we know from other films and from the extended version of The Exorcist, is an archaeologist and a priest, and had also lost his faith as a young priest. So there is very much that about it. So yeah, it is kind of like a duality, and it's like a duality of faiths or thought processes. Like, even the doctors can't agree, and the doctors eventually send, the mother has that great line. So what you're telling me is I have to bring her to see a witch doctor. I've paid all you to do your science, and what you're telling me is to go see a witch doctor. And to me, that kind of sums up the movie, really.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the whole science versus faith thing really jumped out at me because I have a chronic illness and I've been to many doctors, and many doctors are like, oh, I don't know, take an antidepressant, or, I don't know, take a painkiller. And that kind of really stuck at me, that when you've got something like an invisible illness or a mental health illness, and you could go see millions and millions and millions of doctors, and they'll tell you, oh, I don't know what's wrong with you. And we're meant to, as Kai said, we're meant to like solely rely on doctors because they're science and they're medicine and they're meant to be professionals and they're meant to know what's right. But they don't always have the answers. And sometimes even just believing in something other than just science does actually help people. And like you said, there does have to be like a certain balance for people to, feel well as they can feel. So that was one thing that jumped out at me with The Exorcist. Another one is kind of, we see a lot in possession films. It's mainly like preteen girls or, teenage girls just on the cusp. And just this thing of like, once children hit a certain age, their parents find them to be a different person and they can't control them, and perhaps they're not the person they thought they'd turn out to be. So how did you feel, Kai, about that dynamic between mother and daughter?
With Chris, it was definitely apparent that she tried to overcompensate. I mean, of course, there were moments in the film where they were bonding and laughing, but you can definitely tell that disconnect. One being that Chris is perceived to be a single mother, and two, she is a famous actress and she's busy and she's moving around. So you can kind of feel that she's trying to overcompensate with, I guess I wouldn't necessarily say, sorry, kitty problems. You can definitely feel that she's trying to overcompensate. And then there are even instances in the film where people are asking in regards to Reagan being possessed, or I don't want to say possessed, but being possessed, that where's her father? Or is her father, her father's being brought up in that instance. So you can kind of tell that disconnect of, maybe there's resentment that the father's not present in the life. Maybe there's resentment of the mother's fame and fortune regarding the relationship with Chris and Reagan. That you can definitely feel that tension between the two throughout the film. So of course, Chris kind of being perceived to be like this, like, oh, here today, gone tomorrow kind of mom, and dealing with her daughter who's going through this like batshit crazy experience, and she doesn't know what to do. She's got all the money, she's got all these doctors, and still nothing. It's like, what the heck?
Yeah. And what about you, Paul? How do you feel about that theme?
Yeah, like, I mean, they hit it on the head there, Kai, when you were talking about that idea of the father, right? Because there is a whole thing in the movie with the father being missing, and it comes from God to lots of other characters in it, that there seems to be kind of a lack, like even in a lot of the churches, just a side note for anyone who likes to watch the movies, there's a desecration of statues in it, but it's always the Virgin Mary. There's actually not one Sacred Heart or God statue in the movie, which I always found kind of really interesting, and it does come from that. And I agree with everything they said there. And to add on to that as well, in the 70s there was those slew of real life cases, and they did all tend to germinate and start with young girls and families. Like the Enfield haunting would have been huge. And I mean, the film, I don't know if are you familiar with that case, Kai?
No.
With it was a real life case. 3 teenage girls were living in a house with their single mum, and one of the kids started acting out, and it was eventually brought as a possession case. And there was famous pictures. I'll send them to you later. Actually, there's famous pictures of the girl levitating over her bed, and all that
It
sort
was
of stuff.
the thing for The Conjuring 2. The Conjuring 2 is
Oh,
based on
Yes,
it.
yeah, sorry, yeah. But so there was a lot of that on the go as well. There was kind of haunting fever, and it was the first time that it wasn't in like old Gothic houses that like the Enfield house is just a normal house, and the house in The Exorcist is a beautiful Washington house, a red brick, quite modern building, that's full of plants and life and all that sort of stuff. It's not, it's not. Vincent Price isn't going to come around the corner in that house. Do you know what I mean? Like he's just not, and so I mean that all builds into that quite nicely there. And the film kind of takes this subtle approach because it starts with her cursing and it ends up with her being full on possessed. But like we were saying earlier on, and Kai was talking about the fantastic makeup, it must be an hour and 20 minutes before you see her in heavy makeup. Until then, it's Blair, and actually on her performance, I think she gets left out of the mix sometimes when you talk about brilliant child actors. Like, I mean, Mother of Pearl, she's so good. Like,
yeah, I mean, we see with a lot of 70s films, especially horror films, they kind of base themselves on the familial, the home, and the breakdown of the familial. So we had Rosemary's Baby, and we had The Omen and Poltergeist. I know Poltergeist was a lot later, but we started seeing more horror films being set within the familial unit and in our own back garden, basically. And do you reckon that because The Exorcist is one of the first films to kind of set it within an American home setting, a familial setting, that was why people were so terrified of it? What do you think, Kai?
Well, you have to think about just the whole, I can speak on the American family unit, right? You have like the 50s and the 60s where it's like family was just this really big thing, the American dream. You go to work, you come home, you tend to your kids, you go on vacation. That was really just plastered everywhere within the 50s and the 60s. And then you have an era like the 70s where there's a revolution, whether that be sexually, socially, economically, there's this revolution. And so then you have a film like The Exorcist that dives deeper into that dysfunction, or like, this is what could happen in your perfect family unit. And then not even that, you have to think about celebrity culture and then American celebrity culture. And it's like, nobody's safe. Not a beautiful actress like Chris, who has a beautiful home and lots of money. No one's safe. So it triggers that whole idea of safety.
Yeah.
Especially during a time like the 70s, so.
Yeah. And let's talk a little bit about the reaction that The Exorcist got on release. I don't know if you guys have seen the news reels of everyone coming out the cinema fainting and just... It was like, it's things that we, it's of legend to us and to our generation now. We're like, no, surely not. Paul, why do you think people had such a visceral reaction to The Exorcist?
Well, I think because it was grounded in reality. And again, what you and Kai were saying there is all dead right about the background there, about the American family and stuff. And also, William Peter Blatty especially picked out William Friedkin to direct it because Friedkin's style was really documentary. And for the first hour of that movie, it's grainy footage, and it couldn't literally be a documentary about a famous actress and a priest. Do you know what I mean? Like, nothing heavy happens. We hear the sounds and stuff, and I know we'll probably talk about the sound later because it's a character of itself. But like, it builds up nicely. It never ever takes a big leap forward. It takes its time. It seeps under your skin, and then when the stuff happens, I mean, the last 40 minutes are full on Grand and all. Like, you have beds flipping, you have her getting sick, but the film works to the point where it deserves it and where that doesn't come across as stupid. And I think that's why people had the reaction. It never comes across as dumb, because even if you do laugh, you're laughing at the absurdity of it. In that you're like, oh my god, giddy aunt, what would happen if somebody in your family was like that, or if you came across somebody that was possessed? And by the time the possession happens, you're so caught up in it. I'm not surprised people had a reaction to it like that, to be honest. And you're talking about a time when people had never seen anything like it before. Like, never. Like, if you think about it, 3 years before that, the worst, the board in America, when they were rating the films, the worst they ever had to deal with was Hammer Horror having blood or a pair of boobs. And you know what I mean? And this was their big thing. And like another 5 years before that, it was Alfred Hitchcock flushing a toilet. And all of a sudden you have this movie, like you said, where a girl is full on going at herself with a crucifix, and where you have all the language that you have, and everything about it, really. It must have been, to be in 1977 sitting in a cinema, you must have actually said a psychopath has made this movie. Like,
and talking of psychopaths, let's move on to William Friedkin. Nice little segue there. So yes, William Friedkin, he developed quite the reputation for himself off the back of this film. He was quite gung-ho when it came to eliciting the best possible performances. So he, the room where it was really cold, he actually had a refrigeration unit going that made it absolute freezing. He used to set off guns. He used to go like hide guns all over the sets and set them off, and he did quite a lot of things that was almost borderline abuse. Kai, what do you think of his kind of behavior? Do you think it was necessary, or do you think they could have got a good film without resorting to these kind of tactics?
I hate to say it, but no. What I was going to say after what Paul was saying was he did a great job of building that familiarity with the audience and the characters, so you grow to like and like Linda. I mean, Reagan. I keep calling her by her actual name. You get to grow fond of Chris and whatever thing he has going on, because he's all over the place, but it's real raw emotion. And so if that meant that shooting guns and having it very cold, I thought until recently that was just like effects, but no, that was really cold in there. Every time she was like, I'm like, it had to be freezing in there, and then you think of the likes of like Stanley Kubrick and other like really, I guess, more extremist directors, and it's kind of like, you don't want to say yes, but yeah. Especially at a time in the 70s where there was regulation. I mean, of course, not now in 2021 with Hollywood, but there wasn't a lot of regulation as much as like you get away with that kind of stuff, and all the creepy haunting things that went on set too, like almost catching on fire and all of that. Like, it's all in the experience. What else would happen with you making a film as obscene as The Exorcist? So
yeah. And Paul, what do you think of William Friedkin and his tactics?
Well, as a director, I've kind of gone there, but never to his thing. Look, that was his thing. He was at the edge of that new wave. Like Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola and all those boys were looking up to Friedkin, because he was really that first one who said, get rid of this studio thing, lads, with the glossy look. I mean, like I said, it has a documentary look to it, has a documentary feel to it, and those characters feel real, The sad thing was that he put so much into that. I mean, Friedkin's heyday was there and gone in a 6-year period, really. He went from The Exorcist to The French Connection that he won the Best Director Oscar for and stuff. But by the mid-80s, he had burnt out, because you can only really put yourself through 8-month periods of that for so long to stay at that level, But I mean, that film is there forever. And the fact that, like, I think I mentioned Kubrick with The Shining and those couple of movies that stand aloft, they wouldn't be made today because there's more regulation now and all that sort of stuff. But let's be honest about it, that's why they're still at the top of the list 40 years later.
Yeah.
like what's coming along to beat The Exorcist and The Shining? Nothing.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, the only
really
thing that
good
I can
movie.
say is perhaps there was several instances where Linda Blair actually broke her back
Yeah,
because of a kind of a stunt gone wrong. The bit where she's being
yeah.
thrown about the bed,
Ellen
and
Bernstein was the same, and
yeah,
uh, what do you call
Mhm.
him? Max von Sydow left the set 3 times and said he wasn't coming back. He was like, the man's a psychopath and not coming back. He was talked back in by various producers, going, look, they're playing the ego, but you're the star here, man. You're Jesus of Nazareth. If you're not in it, people aren't going to accept this, you know.
yeah.
So like they got him back in, but I mean, in a way, it's unacceptable, really. But at the same time, you look at the result and you go, "Oh Jesus, you can't really argue with it."
I know. I
Like,
want to say no, but it's like,
yeah, I really want to say no, that's terrible, and you can't be doing that now, and all the rest of it. But I mean, when you look at some of that cinema, he's included in those movies he was making, particularly The Exorcist. You think that he should have won Best Director for The Exorcist, but Moria,
yeah.
like the direction in that movie is incredible, and like if that movie was made today, he would win Best Director for it, and Bernstein would have won Best Actress Oscar for it as well.
Hmm.
And the only
Mhm.
reason she didn't at the time was there was still the stigma over horror, I think, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on to the special effects because we kind of mentioned a little bit about the bed rocking and all of that. Kai, you are an expert on this field, so I'm going to let you lead this. What do you think of The Exorcist and its use of special effects and special effects makeup?
From what I'd seen watching a little bit of the behind the scenes footage, it took a lot of engineering to get the bed, to get the levitation. But I really want to focus on the icon that is the makeup look. When you think of a demon possession, or if you're thinking about someone being possessed by a demon and you think of that visually, you're automatically going to think about Reagan, and you're going to think about the scars, the bruising. You're going to think about the vomit, which was like split pea soup.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're going to think of that when you think of any type of demon possession. So that is the magnitude as to like what this film was and what the makeup was. It's not too complex. It's not a lot of blood. It's mainly just scarring, but it's just great. And then whenever watching the movie and then like seeing the actress Linda Blair like outside of makeup, it's like I still see visually the makeup. I'm like, it's creepy. It was great.
Yeah, they were very Dick Smith. He was very gun-ho on doing the makeup on her. I know there was a sit-in actress who did the more kind of hardcore parts, but he was very thing about, no, it has to look like Reagan, otherwise people won't believe it. And just the fact that they used stuff like split pea soup and kind of everyday stuff, it makes it more believable and more terrifying. One of the scenes that I kind of want to talk about is, of course, the head spinning scene. Paul, what did you think of that scene when you first saw it?
well, I didn't know what to think of it, to be honest. It was kind of, you see, I think the problem with that is, even though I hadn't seen the film before, I'd seen lots of movies that have parodied it. Whereas they'd stayed away from other parts of the movie, where that they wouldn't have gotten up. So that didn't have the impact on me that it probably had on, let's say, my uncle Seamus when he saw it as at 20 years old in London. And but it was like you're saying though about the makeup, and it had to look like Reagan. In fairness, that head lasts up. I mean, it's like when you look at it, like it's better than any CGI head,
And that's
like it really does last up. Like we watched the Exorcist prequel yesterday just because we were in an Exorcist mood, and I mean the effects for the possession at the end of that are total dog do compared to what they are in that movie, and but the head spin does work, and that's the moment really where we know that she's not human anymore. That before that she kind of turns back into Reagan and that, but from that movie on, and and do you know what she did? Daughter, that from that moment on, like there's no Reagan anymore then till the end of the movie. So it is an important signal that we're kind of going into the end game,
Yeah, I watched back that scene, and And I mean, I've seen The Exorcist billions and billions of times, but I watched back the scene and I tried to tell when it was a doll and when it was not. And you can't tell.
It's very hard.
And if you watching it, I knew about it being a doll before I watched it because I watched it in college.
Yeah.
But if I'd seen that as a kid, you wouldn't be able to tell me anything. That was real life.
Yeah.
I was real life.
Yeah, because like I was being harsh on that as a 40-year-old man looking at it 2 nights ago. I was like, yeah, there's the head, but I mean, I had to look. Like, I really had to look. And like I said, I take it any day over what they did and anything else. But you're right as well, okay, because anytime there's a movie now with possession in it, they really do copy that look.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's the vomit and it's the crab walk, like, because they have just become tropes. They've become absolute pillars of the possession movie, you know, which you can't argue with, really, you know.
I think the only thing from my eye is that Reagan's has a little bit more baby fat in her face than the head. That's the only thing. Actually looking at it through the lens of an actual special effects makeup artist, I'm like, okay, Reagan, the head is a little bit slimmer than Reagan, but you have to really like, I'm looking for something.
Yeah. Split screen it like.
A bonus trivia fact, I don't know if you know or not, when you were talking about the actress that stood in for Reagan during certain scenes, did you know that was Ellie that was also the face of Pazuzu?
Yes, I did know that. Yeah.
Which is also a great piece of makeup work. My Amory cannot look at Pazuzu. Cannot look at Pazuzu, and has seen the photos of it being put on bit by bit, but still, when that cracks up on the screen, she loses the will to live. Like, and again, that's brilliant. This is a woman who's involved in the arts, and she can't look at it. You know.
Do you see the? I think it was the 19. It was one of the theatrical, and it's like the black and white, and it's just flashing.
Yeah.
It's the flashing. It's one of the flashing trailers, and it has like Reagan, of course, in her full possession, and then it has Pazuzu, and it's just like black and white flashing. It's like no words. It is the scariest trailer. Because I really love like sitting and watching horror trailers. It is the scariest trailer, and seeing Pazuzu's face, I'm like, I can't sleep tonight.
Yeah, I know so many people who are terrified of that face, and it's when you look at it, it's such a simple face. Like it's not mad makeup, it's just very straightforward, but it is terrifying. And the way it is used in The Exorcist, like it's almost subliminal. You know, we don't get long shots of it. It's very shot. You know, there's one where Dimmy is in a dream and he's running towards his mother and it shoots. There's another instance
that's the worst
where
one, I think.
But there's another one where Chris is in the kitchen and on the hood of the oven, it flashes up and it's split second.
And it's almost see-through as well at that point. Yeah. It's really good.
But because these images are subliminal, they stick in your mind. And so anytime you see that face, you are terrified.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what it is. And it's just so smart. So freaking smart.
And again, I think someone added it up and Pazuzu's only on screen for 12 seconds or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think so.
In the whole movie. Like, I mean, that's incredible. Like,
yeah.
And like you said, people are as terrified of my generation anyway, because I'm a bit older than the other people on the call, listeners. I won't say how old, 40. You know, like the people of my generation, it was Pazuzu and Tim Curry's It that we were all terrified of, and like Tim Curry's It's on screen for an hour and 10 minutes, and this thing is 12 seconds, and to make that kind of, you know,
to make that kind of
impact is incredible, really, you know.
Yeah. So let's talk about another aspect of the film that really adds to its horror is the sound design. For me personally, The Exorcist is so unique when it comes to its sound design. And, you know, you've got insects buzzing in the background. You've got a lion's roar. A lot of the sound is very animalistic. Yeah. Which is kind of strange. Like when you think about it, you're like, why do we have so much animal sounds? Kai, what do you think of it?
I had never really paid attention to that because I'm just so focused on like the makeup and all of that fun stuff. But I guess for me, it wasn't a distraction, but it creates that realism in the film. Paul said earlier how in the first hour and 20 or so, it's like a documentary. It's real life. You have these two characters and their family units and their personal lives that are being displayed. And that's what, William Friedkin did a great job at, depicting. But I guess it's kind of like, okay, this is the realism and this is how real this possession and demon possession is adding those significant sounds. And that's actually brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not something that you kind of get on the first view. And it's kind of only when it's pointed out to you that you're like, hang on a minute, there are bees buzzing constantly, and there's a lion's roar, and there's a snake hiss. Paul, what do you think is the point of all of these animal noises?
Well, the first thing that I want to say is, in my opinion, it's the best sound design in a movie in the history of cinema, to be honest, because it's subtle for most of it, right? It's like Kai said, she didn't even notice it a lot of the time when you're watching it. I think the point of it is that, in The Omen, when Damien goes to the zoo or the wildlife park, and when the animals see him, they absolutely crack up and they jump on the car. There's almost like there's something wrong when an animal's making a noise in a horror movie, and it's in that, and it's subtle. Like in the first couple of minutes when Myrn is told that they found something at the base of the statue, and we don't really know what he's talking about. We hear coyotes fighting, and then there's a lot of silence, and then we hear another animal. I think it's a bird or a vulture, and then there's more silence. And when we eventually get to the statue of Pazuzu, one of my favorite shots in the movie where he's on one side and Pazuzu's on the other side, statue of Pazuzu and the sun, and there's just dogs barking in the background, and it's like a call to war, And even then, when we get to the house, one of the first things that the mum says is she asks the German servant to go look for the rats in the attic. That there's those animal noises, and we kind of caught much later on that what that is it's the first signs of Captain Howdy that turn out to be Pazuzu later down the line. It's so well done. The rustling of leaves as well out on the streets. It's like they're being watched, and I talked about the silence as well. The moments of silence are brilliant. Like there's a great moment where Chris is walking down the street and she sees Karis for the first time, and he's talking about his lack of faith, and it's interrupted by bells. It's like she can't connect with him yet. God is like, no, it's not time to connect with this guy yet, or something like that. So it goes throughout the movie. And another Paul fact of the day, everybody. Everybody calls Tubular Bells the Exorcist theme tune, and it is in the movie for 16 seconds.
Wow.
There you go. It's totally brilliant the way it goes from silence and the rumbles at the bottom of the bed, because again the bed is quite as simple. You were talking about the special effects earlier. The bed was early days for hydraulics, so it literally just does this. I know you listening to it can't see what I just did, but it actually only goes at about a 28-degree angle up from base to spine. But it's the noises of the bed that get you. It's the noises of the bed that make you think that girl is absolutely getting tossed around, And even the noise, the noise of the wardrobe when it's coming towards Chris when she's on the ground. You're talking about a lion roaring. That sounds like a beast. It's coming for her, and it actually makes the coming across the floor. It's brilliant. I could talk about it all night, so I'll shut up.
For me personally, it felt like kind of, so Pazuzu represents like the old religion, stuff that's a bit more naturalistic, a bit more bestial, and then we've got this new religion, the Christianity, and it's like these two forces are coming at each other, and that's why there's all these kind of animalistic noises, because they are, as you said, preparing for war, and it's like the old religion is gonna come out the new religion, and that's the way I kind of feel about these beast noises. Sorry, go on.
Just before you go on from that, it's really interesting to me that I had actually forgotten this, and you reminded me by talking about the war thing. Pazuzu, I don't know if people know this, but Pazuzu wasn't originally a demon. Pazuzu was actually a god,
Yeah.
and an androgynous god of wishes. And that's why I like that they picked Pazuzu, because it's like when we were talking about Catholicism versus paganism weeks ago, and when you were talking about werewolves and stuff, there's something really old about it. And there's something about Pazuzu. It's almost like Pazuzu is annoyed that he's not being worshipped anymore. You know, like his statues are underground, or his relics are broken. The only relic we have of Pazuzu is the small head that we see at the start of the movie and stuff like that. And there's that really cool idea that like Pazuzu has been literally buried underneath the ground for thousands of years, watching Catholicism almost steal his thunder, like.
Yeah.
And then this, so that's it. He's kind of developed into a malevolent force over time. But anyway, that was just a small point.
I was going to move on to the religious aspect and talk about Pazuzu, because, you know, Pazuzu was actually protected pregnant women and children.
Yeah.
So why do you think they chose to have this god and turn it into the devil, Kai?
I think I was doing a little bit of research on Pazuzu, in that Pazuzu actually liked to be take the form of Lucifer, in a sense, to kind of like deceive people. And again, I guess that goes back into the whole aspect of like Reagan being a teenage girl, and Pazuzu's actual origin being that of protecting, you know, women and children, and that whole dynamic of, you know, Reagan, I guess, being 12, kind of coming into herself, and I guess Pazuzu seeing that vessel and being like, hey, I'm gonna dive into that. So
I'm gonna get me some of that.
You're gonna get me a good vehicle.
You know, right? It's like, it's perfect.
And Paul, how do you feel about the whole paganism versus Christianity in this film?
I just love that, and you're right. Like, I mean, people used to pray to Pazuzu to stop possession from demons. I just find that so cool, and also so twisted as well, because he's the one doing the possession. But Kai hit on something there that I think is really important in that as well. In that, isn't it funny that Pazuzu nearly uses what Christianity did, the pagan gods, against itself? And what I mean like that is, by that is, he pretends to be Lucifer because Lucifer is relevant. He's not relevant anymore. If he came out and he said, "Hello, children, I'm Pazuzu," then I'll be like, "What's Pazuzu?" You know,
Is that a musical instrument?
Yeah. For hemorrhoids, use Pazuzu, right? But then, you know, but like when the entity in Reagan, that's what it is. This is, I'm the devil. Everyone in the 20th century can relate to what the devil is. You know, and I think that's an awful cool thing. But like, it's interesting that at the start of the whole film, there's that call to prayer. You know, it starts with the Muslim call to prayer, and they do it from the walls of the city that are literally built on the Mesopotamian city, where, say, 3,000 years before that would have had 50-foot statues of Pazuzu. You know, and it's like one religion literally sitting on top of the other one. And I just find that so fascinating. Like, because the day we were talking about our two movies, Kai, we were talking about I can't remember the name of the movie. Oh my god,
we were talking about The Wicker Man, and we were talking about another film that I can't remember what it's called. That's how bad we are.
What is wrong with me? But in that movie, the Barons. No, but there's literally there's literally a Catholic church built on top of an ancient god, and a pagan kind of pre-Celtic English god that's hungry and under the ground. Pazuzu's kind of like that for me, you know.
The Borderlands.
And you know, it's like that for me. And as I said, that image of his visage up on the hill, after being on Earth for 2,000 years with that horrible smile on its face, you know, it's that grin, and even on the little head, he has that grin. It's like, you think I'm finished with, you see what I'm about to do, you know. And I just love that. I just love it.
One of the main kind of conflicts I have within myself about loving The Exorcist so much is I'm quite anti-Catholicism. Obviously, coming from Ireland, Catholicism isn't great. It's not a good thing here, and I'm quite anti-Catholic. But this film is very much it's it's really pro-Catholic, and it's pro, good can triumph over evil and God can triumph over the devil. And so I have this really bad conflict between, I shouldn't really like this film, but I do. Kai, do you have that same conflict, or is that really not a factor for you?
It wasn't. I didn't realize the film was pro-Catholic until I saw the social commentary and how the Catholic Church was like, "Yay, go Exorcist!" But in my mind, I would be like, I would think that they would be totally against it. This is diabolical. This is an abomination. But no, it's like, no, bring people in.
Yeah.
Pope John saw 23 times. Pope John saw 23 times.
So it's just like, yeah, bring people in. We want to scare people back into the church.
Yeah.
And then of course, deflecting from the actual reputation that priests have. Oh, priests are great. They can save your children. And it's like,
You're like, ooh.
Not too fast. So, when I found out that the Catholic Church is really like gung-ho about this film, I was like, now that I think about it, you're scaring people back into the church.
Yeah.
That's clever.
Yeah.
Well, apparently there was a huge uptake in Return to the Church when the movie came out, like particularly in New York and areas like that. They went back in their droves. But I actually think that the Catholic Church, because of course Friedkin's not a Catholic, and I think they kind of miss a trick that he put in there that he made a little bit subtle because he wanted the movie to be seen, and that is that God is kind of impotent in the movie, right? Now, what I mean by that is Murren. If that film was really pro-Catholic, right, Murren would come along. It's called The Exorcist. He's the exorcist, right? It's all set up at the start that he is this epic thing that's going to fight Pazuzu. We get that shot. We see him slowly making his way to America. We get one of the best shots in the history of cinema where his outline is outside the door underneath that lamp, and we think this is going to be epic, right? And Murren goes upstairs and he does the exorcism and it kills him, right? It kills him stone dead. And so the exorcism doesn't work. What does work is well, we call him Demi. We've been calling him Demi. Demi, why are you doing this? So, Demi, why are you doing this to me? But so what happens is Father Karras actually goes to carry on the exorcism. He closes the book, realizes it's not going to work, and says, "Come into me." So the psychologist actually uses psychoanalyzation on Pazuzu, gets him to possess him, and then jumps out the window. So it's actually him that saves the day, not God. There you go. Then. In my opinion.
Smackdown.
Those very valid points.
So let's chat about the curse of The Exorcist. Now, there is a lot of rumors that any film to do with the devil and God is going to have some form of curse. Kai, what do you think of all the rumors of the curse of The Exorcist?
Rumors? The set almost caught on fire. Didn't somebody's son almost die in a car accident or something?
Yeah, right? Karras, Jason Miller's son. Yeah,
his son. I don't know if he passed away or if he almost did, but
yeah.
Side note, you know who Jason Miller's son is? It's Jason Patrick from The Lost Boys.
Really?
Yeah. You know the guy that plays Michael the older brother in The Lost Boys.
Yeah, Michael.
Yeah. That's Jason Miller's son.
Wow.
Jason Patrick. There you go. Back to the curse of The Exorcist. Kai, go on.
Oh, yeah, all of this crazy, all of these crazy things that are happening. And then of course, just people sending death threats to Linda Blair. It's just like, of course it said it's cursed. Of course.
It really is insane. And sure, Ellen Bernstein, I can't remember the role now, and I don't know what's wrong with me tonight. But She
it's the curse.
It's the curse in my head. But Ellen Bernstein, I know she didn't need it. She ended up getting an Oscar for the Last Picture Show and all that. But she lost out on a really big role the next year, like that made someone else's career and won him an Oscar. Like, I'm leaning towards that it was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Mm-hmm.
That it was Nurse Ratched, but I'm not sure if it is. I wrote it down.
I'm gonna say we play Nurse Ratched, but yeah.
Yeah, like I think it was that, but like they're saying, look, you can always say as a total atheist, you can kind of go, but I mean, geez, if you're a dad up the facts there, I mean, it had more than its fair share of stuff, didn't it? I mean, even down to the fact you were talking about the fire, and then you're talking about the fact that Friedkin pretty much had a mental break in the middle of it and was firing bullets off, and all that stuff. It nearly lost its funding a ton of times. There was a crew heart attack, and there's so much there. I actually read a book, like if there's enough rumors and innuendo and actual stuff to happen to write a whole book about the curse of a movie, you kind of have to pay attention to it. Like,
do you not think though that it's like a lot of these kind of things could happen on any set? Like it could have happened on like Love Actually, and it wouldn't bat an eyelid, but because The Exorcist is of the theme that it is, people are like, it's the curse, the curse.
Well, there is that too, because like, to be fair, like more happened on the set of Apocalypse Now because they're out in the middle of Vietnam, and there was 2 heart attacks like that to replace Harvey Keitel with Charlie or Martin Sheen, and then he had a heart attack, but that doesn't come up as much because it doesn't have the spooky backstory,
Yeah.
Those things feed each other, don't they? I know, sorry for interrupting you, Kai, but they do kind of feed each other, because when there's anything spooky, it's like a couple of things that happened on The Omen, and someone said, they're like, Greg Peck's son died in an airplane crash, and it was like, he did, but it didn't actually happen when they were filming, but it all becomes this thing,
Yeah.
It's like, ooh, be careful.
I was going to say in like retrospect how there's this Superman curse, right? Whoever plays Superman, you're pretty much screwed.
Or you don't work again.
Or you don't work again. Or it's just so sad. It doesn't necessarily have to be, it doesn't necessarily have to coincide with horror, but it just adds a little bit more spookiness when it is a film like The Exorcist. You don't get any creepier than that. That's like, you are going into like territory that people don't go into, which is like children and obscenity and religion. Like those are 3 things that you just don't touch, and it's all blended together in this perfectly crafted film.
Yeah, like it really is, and it's about accessibility too, because you're talking at a time where the mass had only turned from Latin to English. I think about 71 or something like that. So like this was the first time that religion was played out like that, because up until about 1970 people wouldn't have touched it. They just wouldn't have touched it, I mean, even in other movies when there's zombies or exorcisms or stuff, they tend to kind of be very vague about it, if there's any sort of voodoo charms and or exorcism charms, they tend to happen off screen, or it tends to just be maybe the raising of a cross. And then it's I mean, it was certainly the first time I think a lot of people realized that there was actually a period of ritual. I was talking to a real life priest a few years ago who was an exorcist, and he told me like the one exorcism he did took 12 weeks. And he also Kai and Grain told me one of the freakiest things I've ever heard in my life. He said, I'd see at Christmas, I'd fly out for a few months, there's at the moment there's a real demon infestation in Mexico. And I went, there's a what? And he was like, there's about 30 or 40 exorcisms a day happening in Mexico at the moment. We've all been cut out there. There's a gate to hell open at the moment there underneath the church, and we have to solve it. And I was like, all right, I'll see you later. So you deal with that and keep us safe in our beds so I can still be an atheist. Thank you.
You're like, that's what happened the past year.
I knew something was different.
Those damn gates of hell.
I wouldn't mind. He's the quietest man of all time. My mates reckon he bores the demons out of the people because he's real quiet and he has a Wexford accent like me. So
I know a few people he could bore a few demons out of.
A common trope in possession films too is that the more like Latin American cultures that is prevalent too. That now that you've said that, and maybe that's based off of like an actual thing, but I wonder why. Like, what would the difference of a demon infestation being in Houston, Texas, which it probably is?
You're like, definitely.
It's probably here.
I mean, I always joke with my friends. We always talk about like, what if, a demon tried to possess us? And I'd be like, God, they'd be bored as fuck. They'd be like, does this bitch ever do anything? And I'm sitting there like making cups of tea all the time and being like,
what would my demon do? The demon would be like, hey God, I'm like, you're too late. He'd be like, dance naked. I'd be like, you're too late. Get sick all over the place. You're too late, demon.
Yeah. Like, I've already done so much. Like, what else are you?
Yeah, I don't need any demons to persuade me. I'm already there.
Like, he could make me head spin around. That'd be pretty cool. Like, you just do, look, boys, look what I can do. Be a pub trick for a couple of weeks.
So, for a film that's nearly 40 years old, do you think it still stands up well? What do you think, Kai?
Absolutely. Like I said earlier, when you think of demon possession, you think of The Exorcist. Just like when you think of, Frankenstein's monster, you think of, Universal Monster. It's a staple. It is horror film culture, and the response still sticks as well. Yeah. I'm sure there's people that in 2021 like, I'll never watch that movie.
Yeah.
Which will say, what the hell's wrong with you?
Well, you're right, because all 4'11" of my mother is proof of that. She would rather eat a live hedgehog than watch that movie.
Yeah. And so maybe it was a telling of that time, and also just how everlasting the acting and the makeup and the directing and the tactics and techniques that had taken place had just how powerful that was, or if there was another force in that. But and it's beautiful to see film to see a film like that. And I always say, I wish I was a fly on the wall in the theater to be able to see that in the movies for the first time. Oh, like amazing, right? I don't want to be that typical hipster person. Oh, we don't get those kind of movies anymore, but we just don't. Not the ones that truly, truly, truly stick. And when we do, it's once every couple of years. But that movie is in the 70s in general. It's like hit after hit after hit after hit after hit. So the films like The Exorcist is the reason why I'm 26 years old and I have a T-shirt on in 2021. You know what I mean? The film
that film's older than you are.
Yeah, the movie was made. Came out in 1973. My dad was born in 1973. So that's crazy.
What?
Yeah. My parents are young too. So.
I drink with guys older than your dad. I'm depressed now.
No, my parents are really young. I'm 46. My mom's 46. My dad's 48. But it's telling. It's telling that you have young makeup artists like myself trying to mimic what was done by Dick Smith. So it's a classic.
Yeah. Yeah. And what do you think, Paul? Do you think it stands up?
I totally do. I'll tell you why. Here are my big self-aware, horror-loving, theatre-directing guy. Amory watched the first hour and a half with me the other night. She went to bed just after the first attempted exorcism, and I watched the last 25 minutes of it on my own, and I was terrified. Genuinely had to pull over the curtain halfway. I have a joint sitting room kitchen, and you can see out my big back window, and you can see the church out the back, which is lit in orange. And I had to close it because I was convinced the Pazuzu was going to go, "You coming out for a drink?" But I do, and something that often doesn't get the credit where it's due, and that is actually William Peter Blatty's screenplay of his own novel. I think that's an awful big reason why we were talking about it 40 years later. That script is tight as a drum. There's not a wasted word. It's total perfection in every single way. And I kind of hate to think that there's not that level of writing in horror anymore. The closest thing that's come to it really was Get Out a couple of years ago, and a couple of movies like that where you're talking heavyweight script where the horror is by and by. It's just a good story, and the horror is a lovely sheen on it, and I hope that comes back in, because as I said to you, we watched the Exorcist prequel the other night, and if that's what people think horror is now. They're just doomed, you know.
Yeah.
I feel for me, The Exorcist is a total package. I'm a massive fan of the book. I read the book when I was about 15, 16, around the same time I saw the film, and the book terrified me.
Yeah.
Like, I couldn't sleep without a light on for weeks. It terrified me. And the fact that Peter Blatty had, like, wrote the screenplay, so it almost felt as if because it was terrifying because it followed so closely to his book, obviously, and he had such a heavy hand in getting it made and picking the right person to direct it and having a hand in the casting, and and that's, I think, why it's such an amazing film, is because it wasn't just, oh, here's some writer who wrote a book, now make a movie from it. It was such a well thought out process from beginning to end.
Until the end of it.
Yeah. So let's talk about the sequels.
Do we have to?
We can lightly touch on them, okay? Lightly touch on them. Kai, what do you think about the sequels?
I think I have. Was it Dominion or the third one? I have
The third
one
one's
of the
yeah.
sequels in my room, and it still has the casing. I haven't seen them. I remember.
I get confused over which one is which.
So there is, the second one is called Heretic. You've got The Exorcist Heretic. The third one, there is two versions of the third one. There is the producer's cut, which is just called The Exorcist 3. And then Peter Blatty's director's cut, which is called The Exorcist Dominion.
Ah, okay,
Yeah.
I'm with you.
That the one that came out in the early 2000s.
That was The Exorcist, the beginning.
Yeah.
That was the one we watched the other night.
Well, this is the beginning. I remember seeing the trailer for that one and being like, I'm damn sure not watching none of those.
Yeah. Bill Skarsgård plays a young man in it, which is a really cool idea.
Really?
And there's a really cool idea of them building a Roman Catholic church from Roman times on top of Pazuzu's temple to kind of keep him down. But after that, it is an absolute can of tripe, to be honest. It's just CG and dirt. Is this the second one? Is the one where Reagan's a teenager and she goes in for psychotherapy and stuff?
Yeah.
And then,
that's right. Yeah. Sorry, the third one is called Legion.
Yes.
Now, the prequel also has two, directed by two different directors. It's pretty much the same film, just two different directors, and that is called The Exorcist Beginning and Exorcist Dominion. There we go.
Okay.
Wow.
Really confusing. Like,
right? I just know that I have one of them that I bought from Walmart, and it was in the dollar bin for DVDs, and I was like, oh, okay, let me just put some collections in.
But yeah, the Exorcist 2 is the one where she goes for psychotherapy and Pazuzu's still milling around somewhere, and her and this other priest have to kind of battle him again. It's awful. It's one of the worst films ever made. Like,
Pazuzu's like Dick Dastardly, I'm going to get you, Reagan, and comes back around.
I have seen The Exorcist 3. I think
The Exorcist 3 is where Father Karras comes back, and his old priest friend finds him in an institution, and he is also possessed by the Gemini killer, who was a serial killer, and that's pretty much it. I mean, it's got one of the greatest jump scares ever.
Yeah. It's the one good bit in it, isn't it?
Yeah, and it actually, like, I knew it was coming. I watched it for the first time the other week, and I knew it was coming, and it still scared the absolute shit out of me, which is really hard to do. But,
and the best bit of that is it has nothing to do with possession at all. that moment doesn't. Like, it's just like, whoa, you know?
Yeah. So, yeah, the sequels are a bit... Stay away from the prequel.
Did either of you see the stage play when it was on?
Yes, I've seen the stage play, yeah.
What did you think of it?
It's fantastic. I loved the way they adapted the special effects from film to stage, because they still have the head spinning. They still have, like, the levitating, everything. I'm trying to work out how they did the head spinning in a theatre setting. Like, I just need to know how they did it. It was amazing. And the voice is done by Ian McKellen. The voice of Pazuzu is Ian McKellen, which is kind of a bit weird because you've got Gandalf saying awful things coming out of a 12-year-old girl's mouth. And you're like, Gandalf, stop it.
I just always wondered what it would be like to sit 40 foot away from an actress going through that, when they're live and live in color, what it changes,
Ooh.
or
Yeah. It is
uh,
terrifying. It is
You
absolutely
know how
terrifying.
dynamic stage is. You're there, so you feel it a little bit more. So it's just like,
Yeah.
ooh.
So what do you think is the legacy of The Exorcist, Kai?
Just the fact that, like I said earlier, it's what 48 came out in 73, almost 50 years, and people still won't watch it. This generation, that's like three generations,
Yeah.
4 generations. People still won't watch it.
Yeah.
Again, like I said, when you think of demon possession, you think of Reagan.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you think of just doing something different, pushing the boundaries in film, and especially in horror, you think of The Exorcist. There's a very short amount of films. I think it feels like Silence of the Lambs. I think it feels like The Shining. Those are like staple films that we get like every so often, and The Exorcist is one of them, if not the first. Besides, like, of course, Alfred Hitchcock's work and stuff like that. But The Exorcist is in its own league.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Like,
yeah. And Paul, what do you think that do you reckon we'd have the kind of possession films we have today if The Exorcist hadn't been made?
No, I actually don't. I think it started the craze, and the kind of the devil did it pictures that came after it.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people started to talk, and I love Rosemary's Baby, by the way, but a lot of people talk about The Omen and those movies. They've actually more to do spiritually with The Exorcist than they do with Rosemary's Baby, if you get me. I think that it really set off a thing, but I think the main thing that it set off was, I think I might be right in saying it was the first horror movie that was ever nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars.
It was, yeah.
And that horror could be that good. That up till then, horror was always the second feature. Back in the days when people went to the cinema for the day and you could watch 4 films, horror was always the thing that was on at 5 o'clock. And it didn't matter if you came in halfway through it. It was the bit of schlock, and you could watch eat your popcorn and watch the movie and wait for the main event. But The Exorcist was the main event.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, The Exorcist was beating like the big action adventure movies and the comedy movies and the family movies at the box office. I can't remember which James Bond movie came out that year, but I bet the James Bond movie for gross.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know if we'll ever see that again. That I know that Machete's It took a lot of money.
Yeah.
But they're very rare that it will be that, and that it'll be a genuine phenomenon.
Yeah.
I don't know, and I think yourself and Kai are right. I think once in my life, as a cynical, jaded, getting slightly too old for people's guff person, I'd love that experience of going to the cinema and not watching a movie to be at an event.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And that movie is an event. And I think in 50 years' time, it still will be.
Yeah.
I think.
Absolutely, yeah. And what do you think of the rumours that a remake might be in the works, Paul?
Burn it with fire.
Please.
That's all I'm saying.
Can we just have another screening of The Exorcist, please, so I can experience it as, I'm not
a movie,
but I want to go to the theater and actually sit, pre-COVID, and sit and watch it with the sound and everything. I just wish I was a fly on the wall.
I totally agree with you, Kai. Wouldn't you know, like, imagine if the three of us if I could go, come on now, hop in the car, and we'd go down the road here in Little Mexico and go to the dinky little cinema that we have, and you could sit in there with your big, huge bucket of Coca-Cola and your lovely hot, salty popcorn and watch that with 3D sound all around you and other people screaming their heads off. Like, we went to see Hereditary in the cinema here, and that's probably the close, and it was all 16-year-olds. So they were screaming, and they were screaming so loud, I got caught up in it. Right?
So you were screaming like a 16-year-old as well?
I was like a 16-year-old girl. It was all the girls that I teach, and they're all like, "Hiya, Paul." I was like, "Hiya, girls." And within 20 minutes, I was like, "Ah!" And that was that movie, which is a good movie, but it's not The Exorcist. Imagine what it will be like watching The Exorcist in that circumstance. Like, it must be amazing.
I hate to interrupt, Paul, but I got to experience. For me, I guess that's the closest thing that I'll get to something like that, at least thus far. I remember going to see Hereditary, and I had like couple of shots of whiskey. I was like, all right, whatever. I'm just gonna watch this movie. Everyone's raving on Toni Collette's performance, and watching it, especially towards the last 45 minutes, again with this being a slow burn film, I was just like, my gosh, like it was a roller coaster. And those are the experiences that I wish that I could have experienced watching The Shining in theaters, watching The Omen in theaters, watching The Exorcist. People were fainting, throwing up.
Yeah.
After watching a movie. It's crazy.
Yeah. I was actually meant to go. There's a nice little independent cinema in Dublin called the Lighthouse Cinema, and they were doing a viewing of The Exorcist last Halloween, but of course shit hit the fan, so couldn't go. It got cancelled, and I was absolutely gutted. Like, I had been looking forward to it all year. I was like, please let the cinemas be back by October and I can go see The Exorcist in its glory. And it didn't happen. So fingers crossed they have it on this year instead. But yeah, when it comes to the remake, I'm just like, please don't touch it. Just stop. Enough.
I hope that set actually gets cursed. No,
yeah, you're like, it burns.
You know what? There's just no point. That's the thing about it. They're wasting their time. They're wasting their money. They're wasting the actors because it's not going to happen. Do you know? There's no way. I will ceremoniously and surreptitiously say now that I will eat the runners I have on me if in 3 years' time we're back on talking about The Exorcist that anybody says is better than the original. You know what I mean?
Get that sauce ready.
But they just won't, because I don't think it could happen in this day and age. I think that the world is too cynical now. I mean, you were talking about in America where at the time where 92% of people believed that Adam and Eve literally happened. Do you know what I mean? And Ireland, like, good little Ireland here, everybody believed that Adam and Eve literally happened. The world's not like that anymore. I just don't know if it could, as brilliant as it is, I don't know if it could have the event appeal, but I don't know if even the original would have the people getting sick on the street factor, and a CGI remake is definitely not going to have that.
I was thinking that you just can't mimic the authenticity of those effects.
Yeah.
Because now you got big budget. It's just like, think of the Poltergeist. The original Poltergeist was brilliant. The 2019 remake was terrible, and they had a quadruple the budget and the CGI and technology. It was terrible. So money and budgets aren't everything with films.
No.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that kind of nicely wraps up our little chat about The Exorcist. Well, our big chat about The Exorcist. Thank you so much for being a part of it, you guys. So Kai, if I start with you, where can people find you on your socials and the internet?
Awesome. So if you want to see what KaiFX Horror Group is all about, you can go to www.kaifxhorror.com. If you want to just strictly follow the podcast, which is Monstrosity's Voice, Horrors and Touch Conversations, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram on the same handle. It's MVHU Podcast. And if you want to follow the KaiFX Horror Group Instagram page, it's going to be KF Horror on Instagram.
Thank you. And Paul, did you get that?
I did. I just have to write it down.
It.
See me, I'm so old-fashioned with my little notepad and my little pen. And so if anybody wants to follow what I'm doing on Facebook, you can find a lot of directing stuff I do on Mike's for Drama Group. That's the page, or the Paul Walsh Productions page. Or if you want to see me sing in a dress, you can follow me on Instagram or Facebook at Baroness von Boomdea. So it's Baroness VONBOOMDEA.
Yeah.
I picked a really easy name, didn't I?
You sure did. And as always, if anyone wants to get in touch on our social media, it's at What a Scream Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. We're also on Twitter and Letterboxd. So thank you so much, you guys, for being a part of this special Exorcist.
Great.